overwhelmed with misinformation. So a lot of times, because we have been outsourcing our power and our intuition to the government, or to doctors or whatever, we feel very confused as women, because all of a sudden the very diet that we were recommended to do is not working for us. And so we're stuck in this limbo, because we're like, well, my doctor's telling me this, Instagram's telling me this, the book is telling me this, and at the end of the day it all comes back to, well, you're individual, so what's going to work for me or for you, James, is not going to work for whoever's listening to this right now.
This is for the women. If you're confused about fasting and biohacking and balancing your hormones, I'm not surprised, because most of the information about biohacking and fasting is specifically for men, and it seems targeted at men that are tech investors or entrepreneurs that have a lot of money and time on their hands. And this is not common for most people, and certainly not common for most women that I know that live a busy life or that have kids or that have responsibilities. And so in this interview, in this masterclass, Aggie Lal is going to be deciphering all of the information out there around how you can, as a woman, expand your potential through fasting, through biohacking, and understanding your cycle and your hormones. You're not going to want to miss this. It's an incredible interview and masterclass. And if you love learning about these topics, then I'd love to invite you to come and study with us through the Food Matters Nutrition Certification course. It's a 12-week study program. It'll take you deep on so many topics, from detox to fasting, to emotional healing, to sleep, to stress, to different nutrients requirements for different biochemical individuality. So much to learn. I'm so excited about it. As you can tell, I can't wait for you to enjoy this masterclass. See you on the other side. With biohacking, it seems that it's a little bit of an exclusive club for like tech entrepreneurs that are men that have lots of excess money to spend, and I feel like you're making biohacking more accessible for women. Like, what are the key differences that some of the more, let's say, current mainstream biohacking themes are compared to how you approach it from a more women-centric perspective?
Um, First of all, I'm glad that you say that, because every time I speak to women, they feel like biohacking is like golf, full of rich white men. And they're amazing. And I love every single male biohacker. They're conscious. They're actually like really
Mm.
inclusive, which I don't think that my experience from golf clubs isn't exactly inclusive, but biohacking is just really good people, because I feel like once you get to a certain level financially, you'll realize, well, it's not about money, it's about how I feel in my body. So
Mm.
like that's for sure. And I realized that when I got into biohacking, it was quite lonely, and I was like, where are all the women, like what's going on? And when I asked the women, they're like, oh, it just feels super intimidating. So I was like, okay, how can we bridge those both worlds? Because I feel like between men and women, I believe that women are naturally better biohackers. We're just naturally in tune with our cycle, and kind of biohack whether we want it or not, because we're just like constantly trying to figure out like what day of the cycle is it? Like, how am I feeling? How are my hormones? And we're bombarded with 168 chemicals a day, and women are way more exposed to chemical as men, because of
Mm.
makeup, because of skincare products and hair products. And so I feel like we are way more likely to develop autoimmune issues, way more likely to have hormonal issues. So we need biohacking even more than men. And I
Mm.
think we're naturally better at this. So I was like, wait, this is like weird. Like we should own this space.
Yeah.
Like, where is everybody? So I'm like, okay, girls, let's do it. And so I was on a mission to like realize that, like, they say a confused customer doesn't buy, and I believe
Mm.
that an overwhelmed woman doesn't biohack it. It feels like a lot
Mm.
of times when you follow these biohackers that I do, they have all these fancy machines that are amazing, but you have to remember these machines are just trying to mimic nature. So
Mm.
you're in Boulder, like, sure, you can do sauna and cold plunge or whatever, but you can just spend time in the sun. That
Mm.
has got a really bad marketing team recently, so
That's
everyone's
true.
afraid
The
of the
sun's
sun.
not got a good rap at the moment.
Yeah, we need to upgrade its PR, because it's
Mhm.
been pretty bad. And so people will like come up with these like really expensive alternatives for things that are ultimately nature. Like, if you think
Mm.
of every single biohack, it's like nurture, nutrition, and nature. And we're just trying to like boost our what's available for us, given how how exactly the big food industry isn't looking out for us.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really mature idea. And I believe that, generally speaking, women are a lot more in touch with their intuition or more feminine energy
Hmm.
people. And that parlays into nutrition as well. I think that's a common thing that people feel. And I guess, something that we've always believed very strongly in, with the Food Matters sort of journey is this idea of biochemical individuality, right? So
Hmm.
we're all separate, we're all diverse, we're all different, we all have all, unique genealogical, histories.
Yeah.
And then we're living in different places of the world, interacting with different local foods. So there's so much nuance when it comes to individualism. With women, there's also that added journey of the cycle, which you
Yeah.
mentioned, right? And how is it that women should think about biohacking themselves for improved energy, wellness, immunity, etc., throughout the cycle?
I think first and foremost, realizing that we need to undo years of damage where were brought up or we grew up with this idea that cycle is a super annoying thing that's kind of gross and it's kind of like for us
Mm,
to figure out and be almost ashamed of. And growing up, we don't have enough education for both men and women, right? So we're scared of the cycle and we think like it's just like, if I can get rid of it, I'll do it, right? So we go on
mm,
birth control that numbs not only our intuition and our hormones and our biology, but ultimately connection to source and, our third eye and how we actually our superpower. It literally is our superpower,
mm,
being connected to yourself, right? To
mm,
consciousness. And so when you think about it, you're like, wow, like take away the most valuable asset that a woman has, which is believing that who she is and what she can tap into is like a curse, right? It almost feels like a really like a superhero villain story, like
mm.
what is it, Superman with like kryptonite,
Yep.
And it's like, well, this is your superpower. It's not something that you should be embarrassed. So I think just changing narrative where we educate women, it's like, hey, your cycle changes, and okay, you get PMS only because you're not supporting your hormones. You're not meant to get a PMS. Like this is
Mm,
not normal, but we made it so common, and we have branded women as crazy bitches that
mm,
for a week before their period are weird and aggressive and unpredictable, but we're only all of those things because our hormones are so out of whack that
mm,
we feel like our body's doing its own thing. And I think I would love to encourage women to just like see that each part of the cycle has its own benefits, right? There's obviously
mm,
the beginning of the cycle, the first 14 days where you feel like maybe perhaps you tend to do more and be better at it, and around ovulation you get that extra glow and you're stronger and it's easier for you to lose weight. But the remaining 14 days, sure, maybe you do less, but like why is doing less a bad thing? Well, because we live
mm.
in a really um I'm trying to be careful with my words because I'm like, well, 5 minutes in, and I'm like already going after everybody. But we just like it's a very interesting environment where we're so obsessed with doing
Yeah.
and glorify doing and glorify getting things
Mm,
done and achieving that. Like for you to say like to slow down, and this is like the 2 days for you to just sit down, take a breath, and focus on your intuition to think big, because it's you can't make money off it, you can't quantify it. Like we're just going to tell women that this is really bad because they
mm,
can't do as much, so they're kind of broken. So we get them on a pill so they can do more, like become those like working machines. When in reality, our superpower is like, yeah, I'm going to slow down for a week every month, not because like even if you don't feel like you need it, because like a freaking even iPhone needs a recharge,
mm,
but it's more so that this is where you get the deepest downloads. Like I don't know about you, but like I make sure now that my Sundays are quite quiet, like Jewish people do Shabbat, which is like
mm.
where you just realize, I'm like, okay, like the hustle can only get you that
Yeah.
far. And
Yeah.
that extra 5%, if you want to build generational wealth, if you want to come live in a place of joy and unity and harmony, is not going to come from doing more work or
Yeah.
getting more things done. It's going to come from slowing down and like removing the distraction so you can be like, oh, and we get that naturally. our hormones naturally get they get us into that state. We just have to like celebrate and appreciate it.
Mm. I think what's beautiful about that is this idea that I think we all know individually at some level, especially those that are into meditation or manifestation or visualization, that there is a component of like doing, and there's a component of being, and there's a component of receiving. And it's
Hmm.
often the being and receiving that's a little bit lower down the list, you know? So,
Well, because it's
um,
like it's such a tricky one, right? Because it's like I love that in my book I mentioned that there's fight or flight and
yeah.
rest and digest, right? But I really like calling it rest and receive, because
Mm,
it's like receiving is a skill.
yeah.
We get resentful, so we glorify women that are selfless, that are constantly giving, and
Mm,
then they get resentful, and then you tend to see those women that get really, really, yeah, they like accumulate all of these diseases and get resentful and get angry because they don't prioritize themselves. And it's like
mm,
we need to stop glorifying this idea that like women should be selfless,
mm.
and they they should really practice a skill of receiving and asking for help. And today was one of those days. I had for whatever reason something energetically. I was like, okay, it's a really tough day, and I had a cry, and I came to my husband and I was like, I need your help because
Mm,
I need to do X, Y, and Z. And I just don't want to push myself to that limit. And
mm.
it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah. Um, in terms of like your experience working with women and or men as well, just your experience in your research and the book that you've written and this sort of journey of your sort of personal biohacking journey, what do you feel are the most common struggles that people are facing? Like, is it got, you mentioned stress already, there's issues around cycle, but what do you think are the biggest challenges that are most common that you're seeing?
Um, I'd say lack of action and overwhelmed with misinformation.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, because we have been outsourcing our power and our intuition to the government, or to doctors or whatever, we feel very confused as women, because all of a sudden the very diet that we were recommended to do is not working for us. And so we're stuck in this limbo, because we're like, well, my doctor's telling me this, Instagram's telling me this, the book is telling me this, and at the end of the day it all comes back to, well, you're individual, so what's going to work for me or for you,
Mm,
James, is not going to work for whoever's listening to this right now. So I can tell you, I used to be vegan for 8 years. I got really sick. Now I'm no longer vegan. Like I feel like now that I eat a steak, I feel like my brain just comes to power. But like that might not be the case for a lot of people. I know people that are, happy juicing. Like I'm
yeah.
actually like impressed, and I'm like, I want to be that, because it just sounds way cooler than like smashing a ribeye like I did for breakfast. But
Yeah.
like I just know that it cannot go back to that. Like I just
Mm,
know that for my body, I need to incorporate meat. And I think that's really hard, that we're like really stuck about like, am I following biohacking, or am I following keto or
mm,
paleo, whatever it is. But like, see how these things make you feel,
sure.
because what's going to work for you, it's not going to work for me. And
I
I would say the
totally
same.
agree.
Yeah.
David Wolf, sorry to interrupt you there, but David
No.
Wolf said this thing, and I think it's so powerful. It was when I interviewed him a number of years ago for one of the documentaries. He said, the best doctor, the best nutritionist in the world is you, and that you have everything within you to be able to determine what's right and what's wrong. But you need to get back into that state of like cleanliness and connectedness
Yeah.
in order to be able to tap into that intuitive feel. And
100%. And I think at the end of
yeah,
the day, like there isn't, like I keep saying, I think fries are great. I think cakes are great. I think everything is great. It's what we did to those things,
mm,
that like if you have a beautiful potato from your garden and
mm,
like put it on tallow or butter,
mm,
like I don't believe that like don't have starches, don't have this.
yeah,
Like I don't think that we were born to like eliminate foods
mm,
personally. I just think what we did to those foods and the vegetables that have no nutrients, and the access to the veggies, the quality of the
yeah,
potatoes I can get from Costco is not exactly the same. So obviously, that just is like a spiral effect, and we're, I think the reason why I think US is sicker than any other countries, because, you know, in Europe, I'm European, so when we go back to Europe, it's like people care about quality more so. So they
yeah,
would walk or wait and shop once a week to a farmer's market because,
Yeah.
or my mom drives for 45 minutes because there's this one lady that brings her own chickens and da 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 da. And I'm like, Mom, this is crazy. Like, it takes you an hour and
Yeah.
a half to pick up one chicken.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, we have Instacart and Uber Eats, and it's just convenience. And so that's like the more convenient, the better. And that's really is the nemesis of wellness. And
Totally.
because we're
Yeah.
overworked, and because we just basically doing things that drain our soul, and we have fatigue, and it's kind of like a catch-22. So of course you're fatigued if you're mitochondria, and your thyroid is completely exhausted because you're poisoning yourself with toxins 24/7 and use chemicals in the house for like
Yeah.
whatever they use. Like every time you're in an Uber and they have those like
Oh,
um
I can't stand
refreshers,
that. The air
my
freshness. Oh,
yeah,
I'm like the windows straight down, like
yeah,
head out the
yeah. I'm like
window.
my dog outside. I'm like
And
like it's so
can you imagine spending, and this is no disrespect to anybody that does this, but I couldn't imagine myself spending 24 hours in a car like that, or 12 hours a day, driving,
But you know what? So that's a great point, because it's like, why can he, like an Uber driver,
Mm,
do that? Because when you micro expose yourself to toxin over a period of time, you
mm,
don't notice them anymore. Like your
yeah,
body magically adapts. But because I haven't used perfume, and I told my
yeah,
husband, like, babe, like, please, no perfume at home,
yeah,
no fake deodorant, no fake
yeah,
we use a very good laundry detergents and no
mm,
artificial fragrances and whatnot. So when we go to an environment that's full of it, I'm like, "Rah." But
yeah,
for some people, they love it. They're like, oh my God, it
mm,
smells so good. And I'm like,
yeah.
no, I'm like,
Well, those bathrooms you go into in the US, and like you walk along and they go and they spray
yeah,
at you like on a timer. You're like, whoa, what is this? Like,
yeah. And it's all in
anyway,
the air. I think it's like, that's the hardest thing, right?
yeah. So there's two things you mentioned that I want to sort of double click on a bit here. First is this idea of quality. I have lived in many different countries as well, including Europe, and they're much more focused on quality. And I find that if people sort of divorce themselves from dietary dogma in a way and subscribe to this a phrase I heard somewhere, I forget where exactly, but this idea of being a qualitarian,
Yeah, yeah.
then
I actually
yeah,
mentioned that in the book. I think it was Mark Hyman, because I actually looked
okay,
up
yeah.
who
But
created the term.
he was like I thought he was the paleo vegan. What's this
Yeah,
one?
but he did use I think when I was
Okay.
researching it for the book, it came
Yeah.
up as him creating the word. So I might be
Great.
wrong, but
Great. Well, Mark's a dear friend. Love his work. And yeah, so to me, that's the biggest thing. I think if people stop focusing on what to eat and more just on what are the things I love that are really great quality, like one ingredient, natural foods that they love, and or simple meals, I think it's such a shortcut to love that idea. But then you said nothing is inherently bad. And I agree with you, but what we've done to it is bad, right?
Mhm.
So like fries and, cakes or burgers or whatever it might be, if you look at the modern interpretation, the real difference is the quality of the ingredient, first of all, like you said, but also the chemicals. So, and I'm finding out further along that the main issue I feel is chemicals. Do you think this is the main like root issue of the problem people have with interacting with food?
I think when people say like, "Oh my God, how do you start, fixing your hormones?" and they're like, "What's the supplement?" and I'm like, instead of like
Mm,
adding things, I would just like remove things, because your body is just like so tired from constantly trying to protect you from everything you're bombarding yourself with, and so I 100% agree. I think that would be like something that is just so easy to replace. And I always say like, what are your staples? If it's coffee, right? Like if it's used, like I can't imagine my life without coffee, or avocado toast. Like make sure that those things are just good quality, just
mm,
the very things. Because if you have something every now and then, not a big deal. It's the compound effect of like, okay, I have a moldy coffee first thing in the morning with like a
mm.
skim milk that's super cheap because I go to Starbucks,
Yeah.
with vanilla syrup, like, served in a plastic cup. Probably not ideal. Can you
Mm,
replace that one thing that you really love with something that's really good quality, and just do that? Because I think it's really overwhelming for people to think that they need to start doing X, Y, and Z, but like just one staple that you have every day. Like I love my bread and butter. I have a good like rice flour bread that I
mm,
buy from my local bakery. I have it every day, and I make my own butter.
Mm,
because I was like, I have so much of it. I want to make my own butter. I got a little butter machine, and I
mm,
hand churn it, and it's so fun. And I'm like, okay, these are the two things I invested in because it's
mm,
just something I want to have every day and not like feeling like, you know, is it cheating or not
mm,
cheating. And I always call myself a bio slacker because I'm a foodie. I love to eat. I don't believe in restrictions in that way of like when I see people like, I have four things all the time
mm.
and I'm fine. I'm like, oh, that's such a sad life.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want to live that
I
life.
know. I'm such like a, I've figured out in my maturing years that I'm actually so much into great food exploration, you know? So to
Mm,
have the freedom to explore a lot of different beautiful types of foods at different times of year, but focusing on quality, there's no restriction there. So I love that.
yeah. So one thing I also like just from actionable steps, like the biggest source of seed oils, which is obviously these are very inflammatory. So despite what
Mm,
the mainstream's telling you, you want to avoid them, like soybean oil, canola oil. Number
mm,
one source in your kitchen would be all the condiments, right? So like
yeah.
whether it's mayo or ketchup or a salad dressing. So
Mhm.
I often get people really upset when I say like the chances are that you think you're doing the right thing by having lettuce with with dressing, like, get those salad
Yeah.
bot
Yeah.
stores at Starbucks and have an oat milk latte because dairy is bad, but instead you're just giving yourself a massive glucose spike. The
Yeah.
lettuce or like the spinach is full of glyphosate, and then you smother it with soybean oil, and then you surprise why you're puffy. Like
Mm,
that's and you're still hungry. That's the ironic thing.
mm,
So I like my recommendation always is to like I have these jars. I got them from Amazon. They're super cheap. And once a week, I make dressings for the week. So I've looked up four of my favorite dressings. One is the Caesars, um, one is tahini, mustard, balsamic vinegar, like the full, and mayo. Making your own mayo is so easy and cheap.
yeah.
And you literally just need eggs and that's pretty much it, like mustard. So I make them in those jars, like a little handheld thing, and make it convenient for yourself. Obviously, like you're not going to be making a dressing from scratch every single day, but if you
Mm,
batch make them in jars that like this, and we have
yeah.
them for a whole week for a family, and that would be like a good first step, like avoiding seed oils and just no seed oils in your kitchen.
Mm. Yeah, it seems like I remember early on some of my most impactful early research was like John Robbins' Diet for New America. It was like a classic book back in the day, and it was very much about plant-based eating, and it was showing that increased meat and dairy consumption was resulting in increased disease. But there was two other things happening at the same time. One was we were increasing vegetable oil consumption and fried foods and putting it in everything. The second was we were doing like more, genetically modified corn and corn syrups. And the third thing was actually more than that was that we were increasing our consumption of animal products that were eating really bad quality foods. So the animals were
Mhm.
sick. So, and then when you start to look back at it, you're like, well, what if all those animals got a natural diet and lived a natural life? What if we didn't do the vegetable oils? And what if we, didn't add all these GMOs and chemicals? Maybe we would have been okay. So I don't know, it gets my wheels turning,
Do you know Weston Price and like
Of
the
course.
research?
Yeah.
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 So I mean that's the reason that I stopped being vegan because
Yeah.
when you read his book and he says like in every culture when women wanted to be fertile they would need to eat organ meat and
Yeah. Hmm.
fat from like animal fat basically, whether it was lard, whether they would have like the juiciest, like because we're naturally like wired for fat, like
Mm.
fat, like the ribeye is like the best part. And then we all of a sudden, on top of everything you're saying, we started eating super lean meat, like so you we would never historically have a super dry chicken, like chicken breast
Mm.
24/7, right? Because it's like not what we were originally eating as a species. It would be, you would have hearts and you would have liver, like beef liver and butter. And I think the diet has changed dramatically. And I think, um, not to say that like lean meats are bad for you, but I'm just saying that it's like we have been so afraid of animal fat on
Yeah.
top of that. So we're
Yeah.
eating more meat, but we're afraid of like the organ meat, which is like the best part. So if you see
Yeah.
the decline of eating organ meat is kind of like incredible.
Yeah, it's we've gone from being like hunter gatherer gardeners, as like Daniel Vitalis talks about, to just being like hominous, like domestication version species, right? And this is a way where we package everything and we strip out all the original organic components of it. You know, it's such an
Yeah.
obscure idea. And so it's a big experiment like modern civilization, but I feel like it's giving us a lot of feedback. Like one of the points of feedback I think is most relevant for a lot of people is their relationship to their gut and their
Mm-hmm.
digestion. And I feel like one of the most common complaints people have is around gut health and indigestion and bloating and gas. And then they also potentially have autoimmune conditions, which could be a result of the leaky gut, and the body sort of attacking itself. So from a sort of biohacking perspective, how do you approach the gut and what are the sort of do's and don'ts when you think about that?
I think we were like still just at like understanding the tip of an iceberg of what gut is, because even if I also got to speak to a lot of doctors that realized I'm like, wow, there's so many. We don't even know what like a perfect gut is meant to look like because they're so
Mm,
diverse. When you go to Africa, to Asia, it's so innate to the environment that we live in that it might feel like there's the fecal matter transplant where you just
mhm.
kind of transplant someone else's gut bacteria, and
But
sometimes
wait, just PS, have you done that or not?
I would love to, but like where?
I don't know. I heard they were doing it somewhere in Africa, but I don't
Yeah,
know.
I'll be super down, honestly. Like I feel like it's such a I mean
I
I
remember when I first read that research, I'm like, damn, that is something. That's not your average sort of probiotic. That's like really something altogether
but it
different.
works,
It
right?
does work. I mean, there's results. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you realize that, I'm like, okay, cool. Like you can take all the like probiotics all you want. Growing up in Poland, we always had to have sauerkraut and
Mm,
pickles, and that was a very big part of our diet.
yeah.
'Cause you ate very seasonally growing up.
Mm.
So you were like dying the entire winter because it was like, oh my god, like these vegetables are so boring. Like
Potatoes
I
and
want to live
cabbage.
in America where you can have everything 24/7. I think
Yeah.
even that alone, like eating seasonally, we know for a fact that fruit and vegetable that has been grown in a short distance from where you are and it's seasonal has much more higher nutrient, they're nutrient dense, right? So that
Yeah.
means that like, does it mean that if you don't have to have as much of it? They say you need to have 4 carrots to have the same amount of nutrients as a carrot 100 years ago.
Mm,
Is it the reason we overeat? Is it
yeah.
because all the cereals and homogenized dairy creates inflammation in the gut? And that's just like there's so many question marks around all of this. But I think again we never, I don't know, I didn't grow up being educated about my gut and like how I can support it.
Yeah. And I think that more and more of us are disconnected from seasonality, like you said. That's for sure true. I do love that about Europe. When you're there, you go to the markets to get your food, or the supermarkets practically only stock like in season produce for the most part. It's more common. Whereas it's true in the US, it's like very diverse.
Very,
Um,
like when I go
yeah,
to Poland, go in June, everyone's eating asparagus,
yeah,
and I'm like, a month later, I'm like, can I have some asparagus? I'm like, oh, it's not available. I'm like, no, but like, what do you mean? Like, I'm happy to pay more. And they're like, oh, it
yeah,
doesn't matter
yeah.
how much you
No,
want to
you
pay,
can't
it's
get
just
it.
not there.
Exactly.
That's
It's so
it.
true. I have a lot of family in Holland as well. It's the same. You have asparagus soup. Asparagus soup is everywhere, and then like a month or two later, it disappears. No more.
Yeah, that's
And,
it.
and like here, there's this like fascination here, US, and I would say developed West in general. There's this fascination with everything, everywhere, all at once, availability. And avocados year round, citrus year round, asparagus as long as you want. Like it's wild, really, and it's a
And
huge
a lot of times
experiment.
don't even know, we don't even know if you ask a person. I'm kind of like tempted to do this experiment, go to a local Costco and say, hey, do you know, like, it's August, September, which vegetables do you think are in
Yeah,
season
in
right now?
season, yeah,
And I
yeah,
feel like most people would be like really confused right now, especially like in a place like California. I'm like, well, I don't know, right?
yeah,
Like I
yeah,
feel like that would be like a big shock for them to realize. I'm like, oh, well, this isn't like all year round, and like how do, like we are just so disconnected and so distracted by other
Yeah.
things that we don't even, you're not even curious, which I think in just a beautiful invitation, because I don't want to talk badly about US, but like
Mm.
just to give you guys, for all the Americans listening to this, in Europe they're like investigator, where's this from, like, right, like it's like a
Yeah.
very much like where things are coming from and the quality of them
Yeah.
matter, like people just like it's part of the culture.
Sure. And can I sort of revisit something you mentioned a few comments ago, and it was around your experience with Weston Price. And I've been familiar with his work for a number of years. And early on, when I first came into nutrition, it was like peak raw food days. Everyone was like vegan, raw food. You probably remember this era.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Bless it very much. It was great. It gave us a lot of awareness, a lot more connection to food that we didn't have before. It helped us understand how
Yeah.
to like focus on cleansing, but then like I love Daniel Vitalis. He says if you keep cleansing, it's like taking the furniture out of your house. You got nowhere to live. So it's this idea
Oh,
that you do
that's
need
so cool.
to rebuild as well. And I've had the fortune of spending quite a bit of time in the last 7 years on this Pacific island in sort of the South Pacific region called Vanuatu near Fiji. And they are living in a traditional way. And some of the outer islands that I had the opportunity to visit, they hadn't seen a white person in like 3.5, 4 years. And many of the children had never seen somebody. And you spend time with them and how they eat. And there's very little distractions with the outside world. And they eat in a very intuitive way. They eat sometimes a lot, sometimes very little. They are sort of opportunistic and seasonal in terms of, is it a piece of a fruit or a nut or a seed or a berry, or is it a bird, or is it an animal, or is it a fish or a lobster, or it's and is it a tuber, is it a root, but one of the things that I find interesting is that often they are just naturally fasting occasionally, whether it's in the mornings or sometimes a whole, like most of the day, or sometimes they have more access to food. So it's very natural for us to just not overeat. And then, fasting's obviously taken a huge turn and everyone's into it at the minute. But then there's a nuance, I think, that needs to happen between people and how they fast. How do you sort of think about fasting in terms of biohacking in particular for men and women, and then hormones, and how do you feel about it all?
Oh, it requires so much context that I feel like we often think of something that's good and then we adopt it and like think that more of it is better. That's, I think, like the Western attitude.
Mm,
Like, and I think fasting every now and then, I think it's like super beneficial. I still fast. I think it makes me feel incredible, especially these longer fasts. I do think that if you combine that with an endless information that women are bombarded with in terms of what they're supposed to be eating, from my experience working with women, they tend to turn fasting into a starvation or overeating the moment they get access to food. And I think there's like a psychological level that it's really hard to explain for someone who's never been in a head of a woman who's trying to just, from as long as she remembers, is she's meant to be skinny, right? And I think it's like I have so much empathy. I don't think I have a girlfriend who hasn't had a form of eating disorder, whether it's anorexia or bulimia or orthorexia. So like even within my community, I feel like 80% of women that I'm close with have either had anorexia or bulimia. So like how do you navigate that and just tell them like, hey, like, do you know that eating every now and then is actually good for you, when they tend to undereat protein and already are obsessing. So I think it's like starting with having a healthier relationship with food would be a great good start, because I feel like if you come from a place of already um, unhealthy relationship with food, that can not be super beneficial,
mm,
and you might be losing muscle. And I'm big on protein and big on muscle, and I think it's just like we want to make sure that you still hit your calories, and I think it sometimes it's really good for weight loss fasting, but and autophagy and whatnot. But I feel like that tends for people not to they tend to undereat protein, or
Mhm.
they tend to obsess over food or overeat after. And that's because it's just like the access to food that we have makes it really hard for us to fast. All these chemicals are making us really hungry, and then when we do eat, we tend to overeat. And so I just want to, like, whoever has, if you someone listening to this that have tried fasting and failed, or felt like it was too hard, or they ended up eating way more after, I just want you to, like, tap into the empathy and grace for yourself, because the environment that you live in and the constant um brainwash that's telling women or men that, like, losing weight just become it makes it a way more complicated conversation than just it's good or bad, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's so much nuance when it comes to healing. And I think this is why, in the matured story of the Food Matters research and all the experts that we've spoken with over the years for our films and different projects, like this idea that we're all different, and it's about learning how you are, and then from
Mhm.
that place, finding your what works for you, at different
And I
times,
feel like in an ideal environment, like when I speak to a lot of people, those who work with patients on daily basis have a very different perception of fasting than those who
Mm,
just fast for themselves. Because 100%, if you have a super healthy relationship with food,
yeah.
100% please fast. It's amazing.
Mm,
You really, like, I have early dinner, so I don't skip breakfast because I work out in the morning. So I would have dinner around 4:35. That's just like my way of helping me sleep better.
yeah.
But I feel like if you are still struggling with a healthy relationship with food, I think there are other ways that you can incorporate, like, 12 hours is a minimum, but I feel like we can focus on other things to then progress to fasting.
So, question, with regards to these sort of women that you have experience with, or if you worked with people professionally that have a connection to potential eating disorders, and they can be as extreme, like you said, as anorexia, but I think there's many subtle variations of an eating
Mm,
disorder that maybe more people experience than less. And so, what do you think sits underneath that? Do you have any sort of theories about what creates more of this? Is it the constant pressure of a culture that expects so much from people, or is it more trauma informed that something happened to these women or men in their
yeah,
past, or is it an environment thing, just where we live, just the access, like you said at the start, you can press a button on your phone and have anything delivered to your house in like 30 minutes.
yeah.
What's contributing, do you think?
I think ultimately for us women, as early, I grew up in Poland. I don't know what it's like exactly to grow up in the US, but even in Poland, I remember being called chubby. Looking back at these photos when I was 3, 4, 5, I didn't think I was chubby. I just maybe was a bigger child, definitely not a chubby one. But my parents called me teddy bear
Mm,
or a little pasta because they were like, "Oh my God, you're so fat!" Like as if it
mm,
was meant to be cute. So you are often, especially as women, and then you're like, "Oh my God, time to lose some weight," and all of these comments that you grew up with, that you ultimately see, okay, like my self-worth or how I'm being perceived in this on this planet is linked to how skinny and how hot I am,
mm.
right? Like that's just the society. Okay, like the younger you are, the skinnier, the better, almost. And so we have this, like, it creates a really unhealthy relationship with food where most women don't really eat. So we start to have smoothies and coffees and try to, like, we're really afraid of eating real food, because
Mm,
I know that for me, for about up until my 30s, I was scared of having a proper meal because I was worried that that's going to make me fat. And that
yeah,
was like the biggest fear for me as a woman,
yeah,
because I didn't want to be fat. And then you talk about, like, like we're mean to bigger people. We think they're
yeah.
lazy or they're not disciplined, which is not true. So we basically compartmentalize those people as like not as successful or whatever it might be. And that's just not the case, right?
Mm,
And so I think that just right off the bat, like for us, especially for us women, and I think a lot of women listening to this can relate, that like it creates a really odd relationship with food, because it just creates something that we should be counting calories and our macros and this and that. And even it takes you 5 minutes on Instagram to like look at nutrition advice. That's definitely my algorithm of, you know, women that are clearly underweight, and they don't really ever mention that, hey, I haven't had a period in 5 years, you know, but I have a six pack, so that's so
Yeah.
good. And only then you realize that most of these women just don't have a period, because it's like fertility isn't something that is celebrated.
Yeah, and if you think about fertility, like even having, I heard about this recently, even having like some larger availability in your hips area, let's say, that's probably the most politically correct way to say it, is that that's extra like DHA stores, you know, essential fatty acids that are used during the whole process of holding a baby and like giving birth and like, it's such a miracle, you know, and yeah, and then we have these really obscure ideas of beauty, you know, and then the fashion industry seems to perpetuate it further, right? With extremely skinny women walking these catwalks, you know, and then this becomes the view of beauty, you know, and I think
Yeah.
we've prioritized these externalities so much in our lives, and like you said at the top of this call, we when you it's when you lose your health and then you start to realize how valuable feeling is. Like it doesn't matter
Mhm.
about things. It's like, how do I feel? Am I strong? Am I powerful? Do I feel like I have just dominion over my body? And
100%.
yeah.
But imagine like if we told women that they're fine as they are, and they just remove the processed food so they don't
Yeah,
feel like
that's
it's,
the second bit though. You got to get that
yeah,
bit right too, because it's a double-edged sword. Sorry, it's like if they're worried about this and then they're trying to eat well, but they're still eating processed foods, it just makes the whole situation
yeah,
worse, right?
yeah. And I think it's like it's just for every single woman listening to this, like if you feel like losing weight is difficult, it's because it's you live in a society that's built to make you fat and sick. So like if you feel like you're overweight and sick, well, great. Like this is, you live in a society that's designed that way. So have some empathy for yourself and realize, okay, this isn't an ideal situation, but there's a way out. Just simplifying things and just removing things, and just eating normal food really makes it quite challenging to overeat over time. And then
Yeah.
that will this beautiful relationship with food and nutrition, and you realize you eat for nutrients so you can have energy, so you can like change the world and not be put in a box by patriarchal system that is telling you that you're just as valuable as hot you are, because you're not.
There you go, sister. She just said it, laid it down. Can I get an amen and a ho or whatever it is? Okay.
Yeah.
Super. Yeah. So that's amazing. And I think your idea of simplification is super powerful. And I've referenced him a few times already because I still have this somewhat reverence for David Wolf, you know, and his whole journey of life. But he said one thing to me once, and he said it multiple times since, but it was this idea that really the greatest thing about nutrition is there's like a very simple sort of very simple mechanical thing happening. You're choosing
Mhm.
this food or that food. Like this, it's quite unique in that perspective. You know, many other practices around the mind, it's like you can't choose one thought or the other. There's like a million versions of gray in between, and you're like in this you know, it's very difficult. But in nutrition, there is really, you eat, he said, like you'd eat goji berries or you eat deep fried, you know, chips, or you eat like, and so how is it that, you know, people can, you talk about this idea of developing a better relationship with food, you know, and if one of the issues is these like, you know, afflictions around diet choices, how do you start with building a relationship with food better?
By pausing, right, and just like stepping out of fight or flight. That's number one. And I think, like I said, when there's some staple that you really like, how can I replace it with something slightly less processed?
Mm,
And just like pausing, and I'm like taking a deep breath. I'm like, okay, where am I rushing? What is it all for? Right? Like the urgency, or the illusion of urgency, of feeling like life is just like so fast. Like I can definitely relate. But also, like, sometimes when you just pause and like, okay, what am I doing this for? What's my goal? You know, how long do I want to live? What kind of life do I want to live? What's the
Mm,
legacy I want to leave behind? Like, is legacy going to be a healthy family, or, you know, maybe all of these things might be too overwhelming to think because I just want to feel good in my body or not feel shit. Like, I feel like a lot of people have this wake up call where they're not feeling really well, and so that's where you basically was like, I just don't want to feel shit, which is how I got into wellness, which is a good enough reason to get into wellness and
yeah.
starting to like connect with yourself and saying like, okay, cool, like what can I do to just, yeah, feel better, not
It's a
even
great,
good, just better.
great title for a book. How Not to Feel Shit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really
Right.
is.
People would be like, I'll buy that. I don't want to feel like shit.
Yeah.
So you spoke previously about stress and you said something about rest and digest, right? And I've heard Dr. Libby Weaver, who I love, she's an amazing sort of hormone stress nutrition expert out of Australia and New Zealand. And she talks about this idea of rest, digest, repair, right? So when you're in this parasympathetic state, you're able to be in that
Mhm.
process. What's taking us out of that state in the modern world? And you've told women just then, or people in general, to pause, which is beautiful. But what else can we do to get out of that state?
Yeah, I mean, number one, it's just like the human pacifier or adult pacifier. It's
Mm,
constantly feel like you can't spend 5 minutes with yourself, because you need to be distracted, because we don't we don't know what it's like to be bored anymore.
mm,
I used to get bored, you know, pre iPhone. You probably remember those times as well, where you just stood in line for 40 minutes, or you waited
yeah.
for a train, or you rode on a train, and it was just what you did without staring at the phone. And now you don't create any space, any pause to for inspiration to come to you. So
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that you don't know what to do with your life, or that you're confused, or that you're tired, because it's constantly consuming. You know, it's like
Mm,
when you stop consuming your coffee, then you're consuming your Instagram, and then you're consuming TikTok, and then Netflix, and then you're consuming your dinner. It's like there's no space or room. You know, if you're constantly pouring, and it's like pouring things into a vessel that you're not creating a space for the vessel to just like expand and make room for for your greatness in a way.
it's beautiful. I agree. And I think that word, that term you used, human pacifier, that hits a little different when you said that. I've never heard anybody say that. And I've certainly known children that have not want to be separated from their pacifier, you know? And
But we do the same, you know. It's just like,
yeah,
now I feel like slightly uncomfortable, I'm bored, I'm tired, I don't know what to do, like immediately grab a
yeah.
phone.
And then that phone is like the entire world in your pocket. Like, and this is one of the biggest issues I have with the modern story of humanity. I had a spiritual awakening, was wild, then started getting into nutrition and making films. And our first project went on to Netflix. It was called Food Matters. And then there was multiple films after that. And then this TV channel. And I started to realize that modern mainstream media is essentially like death, pain, fire, destruction, and distraction. And when
Mm.
you put them all together, it's such a like a mind virus in a way, you know. Like I've heard Elon just recently talk about this idea of woke mind virus, and I'm just using that term differently. Like it's a type of mind virus, this type of negative news cycle in a way, or distractive news cycle, and it's become so pervasive that I think it's like, you know, toxins were this horrible thing to food, right? Now it's going to be distractions, this horrible thing for humanity. Like, but
Yeah.
it's this incredible like bicycle for the mind. How do we approach integrating this tech in a more harmonious way? How do you approach it? I mean, you're
Yeah,
obviously,
I just got
you
a
know,
flip phone.
get a flip, but you're like, oh, you're famous on Instagram, Aggie. Like, how do you do it? Do you get someone else to do all your posting for you? And you just
No,
like,
actually, I don't. And I edit every single thing myself as well. So I'd
yeah,
never outsource that, which I think I should at this point. But that's the one thing I really enjoy. I love editing videos, because the biggest challenge is that the most valuable information requires context and time.
Mm.
And people don't have time. And I'm like, how can I pack the gist of hormones or biohacking in 10 or 15 seconds? It's a big
Yeah.
challenge. And
Yeah.
everyone I hired so far are just failing. And I think there are amazing experts and doctors out there that take their time and deliver context, but they're not hitting the younger audience. And so my biggest goal is like, how can I take all of that, seminar that I listened for 5 hours and just
Yeah.
condense it to for someone to 10 seconds or
Yeah.
15 seconds to just kind of understand, right? So it has to be catchy because we're competing with marketing experts that are just like bombarding you with like, get the Cheetos, like this is Snickers. So this is our competition, and I feel like, how
Yeah.
can you reach the masses? It's so easy when you're in a bubble in a big city to feel like this is common knowledge, but the real work is in people that like don't really have nutritional interest, and you
Yeah.
have to introduce them to a couple super simple ideas without feeling like, using the word mitochondria, because
Yeah.
they're gone. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So
true.
that's the biggest
Yeah.
challenge.
I can appreciate that, and I feel that one of the things that we really have encouraged a lot of the Food Matters community to do more recently is to like take time to study nutrition and give context to the situation, so you can really see things in a much more holistic fashion. And then when you're out in the world interacting with advice from governments or anywhere, you're like, okay, I can integrate what
Mhm.
I feel is right. So I think it's powerful. And probably the other side to my sort of comment before was that media also has this incredible power for good, and this is like, we need having access to our phone, and we can get this information that would have been
Mhm.
held from us previously. So the idea of the internet is the democratization of information is amazing, but it's how do people filter that and
Mhm.
develop a wisdom so that they can contextually
Yeah.
take in what's right and leave what's not, and just like,
Yeah.
that's a future that I'd like to see more of, and that's why I'm so involved in like conscious media. It's my sort of mission now on Earth. Is like, how do we awaken more people to the power of
Yeah.
their own individual potential through reprogramming what goes in here? I mean,
And I think like to challenge even that, I would just say like, I think we are innately already have that within us. It's
mm,
just we've been told otherwise. So the whole, school system is, you do this because they tell you, not what feels right. And then, you have to undo with, Gaia, like you have to undo 20, 30 years when, when you're young, you're in like theta brainwaves, super like
mhm,
suggestible. So it's really hard to undo all the subconscious beliefs that you were, bombarded with Disney and whatnot,
yeah.
that kind of ultimately tells you that you're not wise enough, and you don't know what's best for you. Ask the doctor, ask the teacher.
It's true. And like, imagine if we had more programming about like ancient wisdom keeper traditions around the world that were disseminating like updated sort of, contextualized ideas on the Vedas, or,
Yeah.
these, incredible.
And I mean, so just like a little bit more reference about like Chinese medicine or
Absolutely.
Ayurveda, but also a rite of passage. Like we
Mm,
all just got rid of that, and all of a sudden we're just these like adults, and like kids in in
yeah.
an adult body that
Mm,
can't take ownership and responsibility, so they're gonna blame the government. Oh, but the government, and they're like, that's your freaking responsibility to find out what's
mm,
best for you. So stop blaming people and step out of victim mentality, which is what you do when you become an adult. Take responsibility for yourself and stop expecting other people to do it for you. However, what do? We ultimately don't have the rite of passage. We don't have this idea how to like
mm.
step into our ownership and take responsibility for ourselves, because we don't have that ritual anymore. And so we're still like quite easy to blame, and easy to be just quite big children about a lot of things.
Well, then the pacifier thing fits that, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
we're adult children with our little pacifiers on, like watching what's happening in the world. Yeah, I think it's very true that these rites of passage are so important. I want to riff on that a little bit now, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So I have an adopted son who's part from a Polynesian remote island in the Pacific, and incredible boy. So grateful to be his father. And he's now graduating
Which
high
island?
school. So from Solomon Islands, which is near
Oh,
Vanuatu, and
mhm.
he has family there. And he and I went on a voyage before he turned 18 to sort of, we went to Bali together, and I'd spent a lot of time there during COVID. I was mostly there. And then there was this like incredible sort of tour we went on where we did diving in the middle of the ocean. He had to learn how to give a foot massage from my favorite, like one of my favorite practitioners there. We got tattoos together, but like hand poke, like traditional way. And then
Wow.
he went and sat in a men's circle with some friends of mine there, and like went into these, like did these meditation practices. And then we went and surfed these huge waves on this remote island. And I don't know, it was a modern interpretation, right, of something. And obviously just
Yeah, beautiful.
yeah, grateful
That's
to
all
be there.
things that you don't have to like, it's ultimately up to you what you want to do with it. But I think it's just super beautiful that like no one's gonna do it for you, and just giving him that opportunity to see that like, okay, this is it. You're an adult now.
Yeah, let's go. This is it. So my question then on the back of that share was really about how can we sort of maybe take ourselves through a rite of passage no matter what our age, and what does that look like in the modern world if you're a woman in your 40s or in your 30s or 20s, or if you're a man in your 50s? Like, is there a modern, like older age version of a rite of passage we could go through?
I think so, 100%. I think it's like to or the original point of like what does it even mean to us? For me, my rite of passage, I sailed across the Pacific. So I spent a whole year sailing and like connecting with nature and doing something. I highly recommend something that's connected to nature because it just humbles the hell out of you.
Mm,
Because we're quite arrogant when we live in a city and we feel like we're
top
like
dog.
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you spend like actual time in nature and you're like, okay, respect. Like
Mm,
I will 100% like bow to the power of it. But again, like it doesn't take that long. Like with chat gdp, you can literally go give me a 20 histories behind rite of passage across, whether
mm,
it's I'm heading to Africa, there's beautiful rite of passage there with the Maasai people.
mm,
Like someone suggested the 12-hour walk, to go on a 12-hour walk without a phone, because
mm.
there's this idea that like, oh my god, if I leave the house for 12 hours with a phone, like
Yeah.
it's scary. And so I wouldn't I would just encourage you to just like, simple research. You don't have
Yeah.
to read multiple books. See what's been done. Ask yourself what's the metaphorical tiger that you want to kill because it's the scariest thing you can possibly do, whether it's spending
Yeah.
time alone, whether it's going to a meditation retreat, whether it's fin- ending up a situationship and taking more ownership, or it's starting
Mm.
a business or taking ownership of your health.
And I think that life often gives us these rites of passage too. Like often it's through an
Mm.
illness or some sort of
Yeah.
change of life status, right? Where
Oh,
there things,
100%.
yeah, and so these things change, and then you're forced into this like moment of reckoning. And yeah, so that's really powerful.
Yeah.
Um, what would you like to leave our audience with today, Aggie?
Um, wow, there's so many good ones. I'd say, hmm, don't listen to anything we just said. This is just two people having a deep conversation and ultimately questioning everything that we know about the life. So I would just say for the next week, put a question mark behind every single thought you think you have about nutrition. Bread is good. Is it? Is bread good? I don't know. Just
Yeah.
leave it open. There's no right or wrong answer ultimately. It's just like that curiosity, that open, that questioning everything that just really opens, I feel like a new part of your brain that ultimately helps you reconnect with your intuition because you just start asking questions and wait for answers.
I love it. Aggie, thanks so much for your time, and thank you for the resonant frequency that you give to the food, health, and transformation space. It's a breath of fresh air. And yeah, love all that you share. So make sure everyone listening, go follow, listen along. You're a force for good. Thank you. And yeah, looking forward to potential deeper conversations as you discover more.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And like, you're such a great human. Like, I'm so excited to connect deeper, and like, just like a little onion that keeps unraveling. That's super cool that we have that self-specific
Yeah.
connection there.
Yeah. Peace.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
What an incredible masterclass. Loved speaking with Aggie and getting her, really unique opinion on what it means to be whole, to be well as a woman in the modern world. And it really makes me reflect on some quotes from the Food Matters documentary, where Andrew Saul said, "Good health makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't make a lot of dollars. There is not much interest in you being well in the developed world." All of these industries, big ag, big food, big chemical, big pharma, all thrive on us, you, together, the modern world not being well. That's how they make money. I'm sure their intuition and their intention is altruistic at some level, but ultimately, it's not what we're experiencing and seeing today. And so, if you're looking to take back control of your health, and really, if you think about it, as you get access to more good quality independent information, we invariably make better quality decisions for our health. And this is a big part of the mission at the Food Matters Institute with our nutrition certification course. In 12 weeks, you can become accredited as a nutrition coach, and you can study and practice and receive industry membership in 35 different countries around the world. You will also get access to 50 plus world-class experts. Plus, you'll be listed as part of our wellness business directory so that you can start to help others from the comfort of your own home. And or if you're just looking to do it for your own health and well-being and to improve your knowledge in this topic, or to help doubting uncles or aunties or family members that you really want to get over the line when it comes to taking control of their health, you're going to love this program. To find out more, you can click the link below this video. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to tune into this masterclass. It was an honor and super fun to speak with Aggie. Can't wait to hear what you think, and have a beautiful day. Peace.